The Hippocratic Oath requires medical personnel to do no harm. No one ever issues policy with a rider admitting the policy was designed to harm. But then the road to hell is, as they say, paved with good intentions. It is not enough to desire to do good. The result must reflect the intent. The intent to do good and the accomplishment of this intent is not being satisfied by these shutdowns. Yet the COVID-19 medical advisors are moral persons. Doing moral things seems to have been accepted without question, at least by the left. The people are advised that the economy must be shut down for the public good. We must flatten the curve for the common good. We need to wear masks, socially distance, and wash our hands, so as not to overwhelm the medical establishment. We are told it is not socially acceptable to overwhelm our hospitals. We are not told how the public good is defined or measured. Do these lockdowns produce social goods of such magnificence that failure to comply justifies sentences of 1 year in jail, along with $100,000 fines? What other acts that hinder or harm the common good warrant this level of punishment? We question if tyranny is a common good, even if used for the common good. Medical despots cannot issue lockdown orders without suspending our civil and constitutional liberties. Even the churches, open for 2,000 years to war, mayhem, and epidemic, are now shuttered. However, the lockdown is for the public good. The exercise of our democratic, constitutionally guaranteed liberties is socially dangerous. The experts have decreed this to be true. The implication is that democracy and civil liberties are only a contingent right and a relative good. The health of the body politic supersedes all other rights and guarantees. The priority is not to impose our health problems on the health professionals. They do not wish to be stressed or burdened or inconvenienced by a mere pandemic. Your behavior is monitored, evaluated, and discussed by an unelected health professional who has been granted powers beyond that of any other office in the state. Preservation of the medical establishment is the nation's highest priority. This has been decreed to be so by the medical establishment. Therefore, to protect the medical establishment, we must follow the science. Where the science is that we are to follow has not been clearly stated. So far as empirical studies go, whatever evidence there may be appears to counter the official narrative. How can we follow science when science only observes and records? Are we the scientific experiment? Are the predictions and commands made by the medical establishment instructions on what is to be tested? What sort of predictions can be made when the data is provided by a test with undetermined levels of reliability? The cure cannot be worse than the disease. We shut down the economy, it was said, to give the medical establishment a chance to organize and prepare. Observations suggest that time was spent on perfecting dance routines more than on perfecting surgery. A predictable backlog of elective surgery was the result. Increases in medical conditions such as suicide, depression, drug overdoses, and so on was also observed. We learned the risk was primarily restricted to the elderly and those with serious medical conditions. Despite failing to protect either the elderly or those in poor health, the government doubled down on the need for masks and lockdowns. Yet even their own data proved the chance of being infected was negligible if exposure, even to those infected, was less than 15 minutes. Historically, society has permitted those at risk, or who believe they are at risk, to respond in a measured way to reduce the risk. Why has authority taken the lead in determining risk levels? Why has the side impacts on health and the economy not been considered relevant, at least by the officials in charge of the COVID-19 response? More importantly, where is the discussion on democracy taking place? What about our democratic rights? Has anyone asked if suspending civil rights are ever a good thing or justified? Where is the cost-benefit analysis done on having children stay home from school? What is being used to measure the common good? If the shutdown saves even one life, is it worth it? Is this what we are told? Are we better off saving a life from COVID-19, even if it costs a suicide or several? Businesses would look at the return on investment. An entrepreneur would look at different options and the potential benefit and costs of each. The nations of the world have sunk untold billions into reducing the impact of COVID-19 on our healthcare system, without quantifying the result they hope to achieve. The benefits are uncertain, considering we are investing our children's money into halting the pandemic, and they are the ones least likely to benefit from this spending. What is this thing called the public good, and how is it being measured? A public good is a product or service which cannot be provided privately but is needed. Public goods are needs that, if not paid for by everyone, will not exist for anyone. No one can be excluded from enjoyment of the good, nor can the enjoyment by some reduce availability for others. Things produced industrially rarely meet these standards, but clean air, water, and earth are potential candidates for common goods. It is impossible to determine the nature of the common good without knowing what social justice is. Economic justice provides all persons with a basic living standard without qualification. Distributive justice allocates goods based on merit. It is one thing to promote the common good and another to allocate wealth in a just manner. If we are talking about health as a social good, is everyone entitled to good health? Is good health an economic right, even if we say it is a good that must be paid for? Liberalism is ideologically linked to economic justice. According to liberals, everyone, by virtue of their age and location, has the right to vote. Voting used to be a privilege, not a right. Liberal democracies incorporate an ever larger body of voters. The age of the eligible voter is pushed down to ever younger voters. In the U.S., efforts are being made to give everyone within the U.S. the right to vote, whether they are citizens or not. Distributive justice disagrees that everyone has the same rights. We have a right to demand, but not to the supply. Rights, according to distributive justice theorists, a component of the market. We have a right to what we create. This is the source of our demand. No one can remove this right without invalidating their claim to what they create. The power of the people is in their wealth that they create. The right to vote, or the power to vote, is the power of equity. The voter votes to spend the equity the people create. Socialism is universal suffrage. Socialism is more often portrayed as a state engaging in welfare policy, but this is only done at the behest of voters. Socialism is better thought of as universal suffrage. A majority may vote to have student loans forgiven or for universal health care. There is no power in this vote. The vote without a supply is powerless. All children could be given free schooling. Any group of adults could pool their resources to supply education. If this is socialism, everything is socialism. Socialism is everyone having a say, directly or indirectly, in how a supply is allocated, irrespective of their individual contribution. Socialism is the universalizing of demand. 3. Socialism is demand, irrespective of supply. Socialism destroys the supply-demand relationship. Universal suffrage is a rejection of the mechanisms of the free market. Socialism gives us all a share in the supply, whether we have created the demand that mirrors the supply or not. Demand is the supply of those who provided the supply that elicited the demand. This is why supply must always equal demand. Some may argue that democracy is universal suffrage, but this misunderstands the nature of democracy. The will of the people is not expressed through ballots. Ballots have no power. It's an illusion, a fraud, practiced on all of us, but on primarily the right. There has to be a supply to allocate, or votes of allocation are meaningless. How to pay for social policy has always been the challenge thrown at socialists. It is easy to vote in policies of appeasement and largesse, but who pays a tab? Any politician can promise free housing, free food, free entertainment, but where will the bill be sent? Who will pay the cost? If everything is obtained what they want for free. The hard truth is we have only those rights we can pay for. A right is a demand. The right to life is a demand for a social good called life. A fetus cannot pay for this right, and so it is refused, at least by Democrats. Democrats can vote for free education and health care, but someone is going to have to supply the right or pay the cost of that social good. Disconnecting supply from demand using universal suffrage and representative democracy is an evil of epic proportions. The problem for the West is that liberals are 100% socialist. They are their ideology. Therefore, when democracy gives Democrats a chance to vote, they vote their liberalism. This is what they advocate for. This is what unites them and what gives them their unity. The right is not united in ideology in the way the left is. They are market-orientated. Western culture gives us 50% market choices in which supply and demand operate, and socialism operates for the other 50%. This may seem like more or less even odds. Conservatives can vote in conservative governments, but the odds do not work like that. The liberals may not always win, but they never lose. Regardless of what happens in an election, the state always exists, and the welfare state is always maintained. The state is always socialist to some level, and at every election the left has another chance to push their agenda forward. Regardless of losses, conservatives have very little chance of reversing what liberals have locked in place. In other words, the right has been given the option of resisting the inroads of socialism, but not the option of changing the rules of the game, which ensures the left wins in the long run. The game is rigged because so long as social democracy exists, the people vote on how much socialism they will have. They cannot vote not to be socialist. Until the right understands this and demands democracy in place of social democracy or liberalism, our culture, which is dependent on democracy as the will of the people, will be eroded. Social democracy is the will of the voter. The voter is not the people. The power of the voter is not synonymous with the power of the people. The will of the people is not a subjective impression with no empirical correlate. The will of the people is the people's ability to supply goods and services, colloquially, dollars. The will of the people can be measured economically as transactions recorded. The will of the people is manifested in the people's economic power, not in the ballot. The ballot represents the will of the voter. The voter is not the people. The will of the people is manifested in the market. The voter is a legal person or legal agent created and vouchsafed by the state. The people are natural persons created and ordained by God alone. Legal persons are subjects of Babylon. Natural persons are citizens of Zion. Legal persons are voters. Natural persons are democratic. The mission of positivists is to privatize the public sector. The mission of all democratic persons is to privatize the public sector. Our mission is to transform the will of the voter into the will of the people. Our goal is to have the will of we the people expressed through the mechanisms of the market. Our intention is to overthrow or convert the subjects of the state into natural persons. The power of the voter is expressed through socialism. Socialism is an app, for want of a better expression, that asserts itself between the two factors of the demand-supply equation. Socialism corrupts demand like a virus destroys and reconfigures data, so supply becomes equally divided amongst the target group. This is what socialists call equality of outcome. Democracy creates equality of opportunity. Citizens of Zion have an equal ability to create and own what we create and benefit from what we have produced. Zion is the world's first democracy and the counterpoint to Babylon. The building of Zion is the empowerment of the people of God. Babylon represents the liberal voter of socialism. Socialism inserts itself between the factors of the demand-supply equation to destroy and confound the will of the people. The will of the people can only be expressed through the mechanisms of the market, which is the real democracy. Zion systematically destroys the public sphere to create private institutions for the provision of public goods, or what are considered public goods, such things as roads, schools, security, social security, and so on. Zion requires people to chair local congregations. Zion represents the will of the people, not the will of the state. Please contact us for more details. And you can find us at Logical Positivist. LogicalPositivist.com.